everyone, and welcome to another exciting edition of Training Unleashed. We got a really great guest. I'm very excited. Before we do, on behalf of the Learning Network, I want to welcome you to the show. I also want to thank my sponsors, C-Suite TV and C-Suite Radio. Also remind everybody we're on YouTube, the Training Unleashed Network. We have a really great guest today, Ash Beckham, true expert in DE&I and leadership. Ash has done a TED Talk with close to 3 million views, absolutely worth watching. And I'm going to ask you this question to start. What is Pancake Girl, and why does it matter?
Pancake Girl, thanks so much for having me, Evan. I'm so excited to be here. Pancake Girl to me is the amalgam of all the times when we have hard conversations around DEI that a question is just a question, right? That it isn't necessarily layered, that you can sometimes people are just curious, and how do we empower everyone to be able to have the answers that are empowering for them, but also are educational and resourceful for other people. So Pancake Girl was my biggest teacher.
Well, part of the story I really loved is you really talked about everyone gets to come out of the closet. And maybe tell us a little bit more about what that means.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I knew that, so many times I would hear from friends of mine that identified as straight, or different diversity than I had, that they would never know what that felt like. And to me, we're not that different. Those experiences aren't that different. The details of it, the consequences sometimes are very different. But that feeling in the pit of your stomach of not wanting to tell someone you, either a stranger or someone you care about, someone you love, something, to tell them something that you think will change their opinion of you, is a really scary thing to do. It doesn't matter necessarily with that thing you're telling them, so much as that fear that you have and the hesitancy to tell them. And I think when we can connect and see ourselves as similar rather than different, we have an ability to understand each other better.
I think you're so true. Everybody has a story about themselves they hide. And when you finally have the courage to share, it's really, really liberating.
Absolutely.
One of the things about D&I that I personally feel passionate about is that D&I is good for business. It's not a charity. It's not a nicety. Diverse businesses perform better. There's statistics. It proves it. There's a lot of conversation going on right now about being too woke. And I'm curious of your take on that movement and how, if at all, it should impact the workplace.
Well, I do think that you have to have people understand, people that don't think that DEI initiatives or creating inclusive cultures benefit them. I think that when we talk about inclusion, or when we start with diversity, right, the very first word of that, there are people that think that doesn't include them. And I think that what's happening now, and the best response to the anti-woke movement, is this lens of seeing almost a DEI 2.0, which is there's room at the table for everybody. And by everybody, we mean everybody, right? We have a baseline of respect, a baseline of understanding, a baseline of curiosity, right? Like, we can have some ground rules to protect our people, but that everybody makes the company culture what it is, makes the team culture what it is. And you don't have to check a diversity box to be able to be part of that conversation. So I think that when people can see that it isn't a zero-sum game, right? And that we outperform as teams, as individuals, we're better at recruitment and retention. We're better at creativity and innovation, right? Like, all of those things are better. It doesn't just serve the individual, it serves the team and the organization, because the breadth with which we are gathering new ideas is different. So we're all better because of that. So it isn't, an us versus them. It's more of a we. So how do we have people? It's an education challenge as much as it is anything.
I totally agree with you. When you work with clients, a lot of your emphasis is incorporating DEI into the leadership culture of the organization. Can you explain to us what that means?
Well, I think that goes back to the fact that, it's not the responsibility of our friends of color to make sure that we have racial equity at an organization, or LGBTQ friends, right? It's everybody's responsibility, in the same way that DEI is not an HR issue, it's an organizational issue, right? That idea of creating inclusive cultures is much broader than just representation, because I feel like, diversity is who we are. But just because you have diversity, you don't get the metrics that you spoke to in the beginning of that outperformance, right? You need to create a culture that is equity. So diversity being who we are, equity being how we're treated, and inclusion being how we feel. And you need to get all of those boxes, right? And so when you have a leadership that understands that understands that making people feel that they have a sense of belonging, that they are part of the team, not in spite of their diversity, but because of it, I think is a huge piece in moving an organization forward. But you have to have the people at the top that are willing to have the harder conversations, right? And be vulnerable and be those mentors on this journey of, just because I am not one of does not mean I cannot stand with, right? Like I have the ability to do that.
Yeah.
I have to be able to educate myself to have a stance that's willing to evolve around a lot of these issues, even if I don't identify as a certain, historically marginalized group.
So a lot of companies, and I hope my listeners are listening because I'm sure I'm talking about some of the companies here, do D&I training once a year. Maybe it's an online course. By the way, Learning Network has one. But that's it. It sort of sits. How do you keep the culture of being inclusive, diverse, and equity? I'm mixing up the letters and driving myself a
Sure.
little confusing. How do you keep the culture year round? How do you keep it vibrant as opposed to a once a year check the box?
Sure, because I don't think that we don't only care about our LGBTQ plus athletes or our athletes, employees in June, right?
Yeah, I
Or
totally
our
agree.
friends of color in their respective month, right? February, March, which we have to be able to make it a part of our regular practice, right? Because the challenges that we face that are unique to our diversities happen throughout our workplace. And what we're really trying to do is build this organizational culture of trust, that we can trust each other, that we can be vulnerable. If I don't feel that I can openly have a conversation with my colleagues about, you know, the fact that my wife and I went out to dinner, if I have to kind of guard what I say or who I say that in front of, there's no way that I'm going to bring my best and brightest idea. I don't feel safe in an organization like that. Or that there are things in the news that are distracting to me because of how they affect me personally, right? That idea that we are it's the human side of human resources, right? That we are not just employees or coworkers, but we're humans in relationship. And if we can build trust, then we have the ability to have those more challenging conversations, right? We don't just do DEI to celebrate it and check the box. We do it so when things get hard, we have a foundation of trust among all of our colleagues that however you show up and whatever you bring is honored and respected here, and we are better because of it.
I like that. And what you're really talking about is the values are integrated with company values. I want to shift gears a little bit here and talk about leadership because you have the 8 pillars of leadership. And if you mind just taking us into that direction for a little bit, what are the 8 pillars of leadership?
Uh, well, I think just to segue a little bit, I was speaking to companies for so long they were focused on the individuals, right? The empowerment of historically marginalized individuals. And I would ask people, do you they would come to me after the talk and say, Ash, I can't wait to implement these strategies when I have this many direct reports, when I have this title, when I get this degree, when I manage a budget line that's plus whatever. Like there was this waiting point to stepping into leadership. And so I think this idea of creating leaders and empowering leaders exactly where they are, leadership more as a disposition rather than a position is so fundamentally key. Because you ask people, who sees himself as a leader in a room, and depending on the demographics, 40 to 60% of the hands would go up. But then you say, who sees the person to the left of them as a leader, and everybody's hands go up. So it's a self-perception issue, right?
Hmm.
It's people who don't see themselves in this leadership role. And so this idea of the 8 pillars of leadership really allows you, whether, and this is, from the Fortune 100 C-suite executive to the kid that's riding the bench on the 12U soccer team, right? That you can lead with these traits exactly where you are. So we start with things like, empathy and individuality and courage and grace. And the idea for me is these kind of hardcore leadership principles that we've always been shown don't necessarily fit all of us, right? And the old saying, if all you have is if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? And so this idea of these 8 pillars was different situations require different leadership skills. Sometimes I really need empathy and a little bit of humility, right? Other times I need a whole lot of courage and some grace. So when I can work on all of these, I can go after any problem, any DEI problem, any leadership problem, any work issue, and I can bring the exact set of skills that I need to address that issue, right? There's not just one way to lead. And so how do I kind of create my leadership brand with the skills that I'm inherently good at, and also the skills that I can practice developing?
Hey there, listeners. Time to take your training to the next level. The Learning Network has come out with Breeze, which is an online authoring tool. This is, like its name, a breeze. It is so easy to create engaging content your learners are going to love. But more importantly, you'll create content that will truly be memorable and truly retained by your listeners. Go to learning.net, schedule a demo, and check out Breeze. Interesting. I, I like this concept of leadership brand. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. I think it's most rooted in authenticity, right? And when I'm going through and I'm establishing myself as a leader, again, I'm at a new organization, I'm in a new position, it's post a consolidation, wherever I am starting my leadership journey after listening to the show, that there is a consistency in the leader that I want to be, right? I'm a leader that wants to be as authentic as possible, right? Those are one of the traits that when people come in and they talk to me, they know they're going to get the truth. Now, authenticity and transparency, two totally different things, right? I don't have to divulge everything to give you enough, but I'm going to be known. What are you going to be known as a leader? I'm going to be known as a straight shooter, right? I'm going to be known as somebody who has the courage to have difficult conversations. I'm going to be the person who has the ability to have um empathy towards anyone in the organization, right? Because you don't have to agree with someone to be empathetic. I'm going to be somebody who strives to have everyone's voices heard, right? That I'm going to be mindful of who doesn't speak up in meetings, and not bring them into the fold by calling them out because maybe that's not where they're comfortable, but making sure I get their feedback in a different setting where they feel more comfortable sharing, right? Like when people think of me as a leader, what are the consistent, no matter what situation we're in, what are the traits that they think of when they think of me? And then how do I hone those skills? Because that's what we want in our leaders is predictability, right? We want to know that when we walk in that office with whatever problem we have, whatever success we have to celebrate, we want to know what we're going to get, right? We want to trust in that person, not that their response is going to be contextual, certainly, but the demeanor of the person is going to remain the same. That those are the kind of things that we strive for when we create our leadership brand is who are we day after day, situation after situation, no matter how high stakes they are, how do we show up, right? And we have so much control of what that looks like, and we can practice that in a meeting later this afternoon, right? Of being that person who's solid, who's predictable. And also the other thing is that is very flexible, right? The introvert can embrace being the introvert, right? If everybody knows that the best way to have a conversation with me is a side one-on-one, that's great, right? Is what people know. It's what they know consistently of how I show up and how I best work, right? Because we want to celebrate those individualities and work with them, because I think the important part about culture is that it has to change. That when you join the team, if our culture doesn't change slightly to integrate you into it, then it's not an inclusive culture. We have to be ready for change.
Wow, you have said a lot, and I love that. I'm gonna want to share what I think I heard. I don't want to label it as most important, but the thing that really struck me as novel and interesting, and that's when you really talked about how everyone is a leader. And I totally agree with you that certain people are good, people look at you as a leader that person might not feel they're a leader. How do you go to somebody? Because I believe great companies have leaders at every role. Every person feels empowered to raise their hand and say there's something wrong, to make suggestions, to make improvements. So if you were going to coach somebody that you work, they report to you.
Mhm.
I hate the word they work for you because I just don't like it. They work with me. It's the way
Sure.
I like to culturally think about it. How do you coach somebody that doesn't see themselves as a leader to understand that they, in fact, have leadership responsibilities and that they should embrace leadership as part of who they are within the workplace?
Yeah, well, I think a really important part of that is to have an honest conversation, right? I think there's that validation of I see you as a leader, and that there's different ways to lead, right? There's leading by example. It's the person that's always on time to the meeting every single time. It's the person who has the ability or the willingness to um, change their calendar at the last minute to accommodate a really important meeting, right? There are these ways that you can be consistent, that you can constantly show up, that is leading by example, right? So how do we, if we are in the leadership role and we have this direct report that's coming in, how do we validate what we see as their leadership style? How do we communicate with them that we need them to lead, right? That the team is better when they feel empowered. And then what can we do to help them take on a bigger leadership role? And again, not in the traditional sense of um we always, I feel like we get caught up so often in what the org chart looks like and what workflow looks like. Like, it's not that form of leadership. If that's what's validating to our direct report, then absolutely, let's ingrain that. But how do we open our mind and see how they can lead in a way that makes them feel more comfortable, in a way that they think they can shine, in a way that they can pursue what some of their professional development goals are, right? I think that making a leadership component, again, not in the traditional sense, but a leadership component, part of an annual review or a quarterly review is key, right? What gets measured gets changed. So how are we making sure that we have these they're not even intangible, that we can create these markers and these steps forward for people to develop in the leaders that they want. We don't know what resources they're looking for, they need, until we start having these conversations, right? So I think there's an openness that comes with our employees that we really need to see, well, what do they need? It's that servant leadership lens, I think, a lot of ways in developing our employees regardless of their level.
So Ash, you're a great guest, very interesting person. I really love the mix of D&I and leadership and bring it all together into one. I know our audience would love to know more about you, what you do for speaking, what kind of customers and clients you work with. So tell us more about you and tell us more about how people that want to can work with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I work with high performing individuals and teams to help them understand and embrace the power that comes from an authentic leadership style and an authentic team environment, right? And authenticity brings in all of these things we're talking about, right? Empathy, courage, grace, trust at the most foundational level. So I work with typically teams that are newly put together through either a launch or a reorg or a consolidation, right? A lot of times in building that trust in those smaller environments, I work with executives on their leadership professional development journey. How are they creating strategies to connect it and lead in an inclusive way? And then I also work with organizations kind of on that larger level, just as far as bringing a new lens to DEI in how the organization establishes their culture and empowering leaders at every level. So that kind of initial leadership journey launch pad that we have for everybody. So there's different ways I work with organizations. I love in person, of course. The pandemic was tough on that. I also do stuff virtually. So it's a wide swath, and I think organizations are in so many different places in their journey. And we're not asking people to kind of stratospherically rise. We're just trying to get them to take one step up, right? It's this incremental increase where you're creating a new floor for your organization or your team.
And how do people reach you?
Sure. So it's ashbeckham.com is my URL. I'm on LinkedIn, social media, and at all the things at Ash Beckham. So I'm pretty easy to get a hold of that way. And then some of the offerings for the things that I offer for organizations is on ashbeckham.com, different workshops and leadership keynotes and things like that.
So Ash, I'm going to ask you actually to spell out your last name so
Yeah,
that everyone gets
absolutely.
it right.
For sure. So it's Ash, ASH, Beckham, BECKHAM.com.
Of course, if you go to trainingunleashed.net or you go to our YouTube channel, Training Unleashed Network, you can see the show notes, and you don't have to know how to spell Beckham. You can just look it up.
Yeah.
Ash, appreciate you as a guest. We always end with this one tip for the audience. If you had one tip to share, what would that one tip be?
Well, I think the biggest, whether it's DEI or leadership, right? It's that kind of crossing the threshold of something that you don't currently do, right? Like you know who you are in this moment, but to do the thing that's more authentic, to do the thing that makes you uncomfortable, I think is what that journey is. So my tip would be to do something uncomfortable every day, right? Something that's out of the ordinary. It doesn't have to be huge, right? These are incremental steps, but if you're not uncomfortable, you're not growing. You're not up leveling as a leader. You have to be able to withstand that discomfort, because I think DEI work, especially in the moment that we're at right now, I think leadership work and moving towards being an inclusive leader is uncomfortable, and that's not going to stop. It's your ability to feel that and act anyway that is really going to set you apart as a leader.
I love that. If you're not uncomfortable, you're not growing. What a cool way to think about it. What a cool way to help someone build the courage to be more authentic and to take risk. Ash, on behalf of the Learning Network, thank you very much for being a guest on the show. The audience, we deeply appreciate you. Without a show, we wouldn't have one. And certainly want to thank C-Suite Radio and TV to be our sponsor. And of course, check us out on our YouTube channel, Training Unleashed Network. Everyone have a great day.